I hadn't ever been to Jersey before. In fact, up until that date, I didn't know what it was like the culture other than Jersey Shore, which I watched on MTV. And
the funny thing is those guys are from Long Island.
Oh.
So they're all, like, everybody down the Jersey Shore is like, we're hammerheads, but we're not those guys.
Wait, does it piss them off? Are they like, yo, this...
Yeah.
Oh, really?
Yeah, because it was called Jersey Shore, but all those kids were from, like, Syosset in Long Island. Like, none of those people were from Jersey.
And this is not really the cream of the crop of the intellectual breed.
Well, listen, we didn't mind that. We're used to that.
As a broadcast journalist, I've spent my life traveling the world and made my living interviewing the greatest fighters of all time. When boxing shut down, I finally had a chance to look around this world of conflict and could see the fight in everyone. Until this day, I talk to the greatest fighters and thinkers of our time about their fight. On Luminary, I'm Radio Rahim, till this day. Today we start the first chapter in the book of a comedian who somehow became the most trusted news source since Walter Cronkite, a kid from central New Jersey who found his lens and showed us the world through his eyes. Jon Stewart. Chapter 1. We put a man on the moon.
So I grew up in Central Jersey, which is a controversial statement to even make. This may not be the way to start off your program, because Central Jersey I've already jumped into an enormous geographical dispute.
Oh, wow. How so?
Well, there's a North Jersey. Very clearly there's a South Jersey. Central Jersey, where I am from, we claim as Central Jersey. But there's a good portion of New Jerseyans who would suggest that Central Jersey is a myth.
Well, I don't understand. Of course, there's a central everything.
This is my point. I live there. I know it's like saying, the abdomen doesn't exist. It's chest and legs. And you're like, no, everything has a torso. But so Central Jersey is, you sort of got like, there's different cultures. Northern Jersey is much more of like New York City, commuter town. There's a ton of money in Northern Jersey. It's only 12,000 square feet will do. The certain communities there. South Jersey, much more agricultural, much more rural. It's the Pine Barrens. It's a great place to make and distribute methamphetamine.
It's an industry town.
It's an industry town. And then there's Central Jersey, which is Trenton and the surrounding. And so Trenton, which was a steel town, which was a hub for roebling, building bridges and things, is now reduced to, I think it makes Chappelle and Trojan rubbers, I think is.
Oh, geez.
So basically weekends. We make weekends.
One out of two ain't bad.
There you
go. Do the people in South Jersey aspire to become North Jerseyans, or do they frown upon?
They aspire to become Alabamans.
Oh, Jesus.
And Georgia.
They're going to go the other way.
Yeah, that's right. It's bandana on the rearview mirror, playing the Outlaws and Molly Hatchet and Leonard Skinner, and it's got much more of like a Southern flavor. Like you'll bang through Southern Jersey and be like, oh, did they fight for the Confederacy? I didn't realize that.
See, you grew up in the 60s, which is...
60s and 70s, yeah.
Right. I mean, you're early. Okay, so I'm a believer that the environment you're born into, although, we don't remember being born, I feel like the atmosphere in your home, in your neighborhood, and in the world is the first thing that starts to take shape of your
question.
Awareness and your place in it. And so growing up, at least the first 8 years of your life in the 60s.
Tumult.
And then in Central Jersey, what was the first influence that you felt like where you had an idea of where you were in the world and what that meant?
When you're little, you don't have a sense of differentiation. You don't understand that your town is different from someone. It's sort of like that first moment, you have a daddy and a mom, right? And that first time you go to college, you're like, wait, you have a daddy? Wait, what? So the first sort of sentient moments that I can remember were not local, but national, because it was a time of Martin Luther King was killed. Robert Kennedy. I can remember, I still have the newspaper from the moon landing. Like, these were seminal moments, but they were national and international. I can remember the newspaper from when Robert Kennedy was killed, you know, the stenciled outline of his head and where the wounds were. So my sense was of danger, that good people are vulnerable, that we take out the best of us. And, you know, Watergate, you know, this was a very tumultuous, cynical time where authority was upside down, where there was protests and riots. I can remember. So I went to, when I was, I don't know, in kindergarten, my parents sent me, because they were still together at this point, I was sent to a yeshiva in Trenton. And I can remember when Martin Luther King was killed, they made us all get under our desks because there was unrest, and turned all the lights off. And we all just sat under our desks with the lights off because this great man had been killed, and people were very upset about it. But in our minds, we were just like, no school.
Well, grade school had a lot of confidence in the fortified wood in those desks. I was sat under my desk in air raid drills, like for...
Really?
Yeah, in case there was a nuclear attack.
Yes, yes. The desks were built so well back then.
I mean,
they would survive, you know, unrest, air raids, nuclear bombs, nothing like it.
And so now, knowing kind of the absurdity of that as some kind of protection,
yes,
that gives you comfort, right? Like, they're telling you there's something you can do. If this catastrophic event happens, it's entirely out of your control, that could wipe out an entire city, all your family and friends. If you just do this, you might be okay.
You might be okay. If you just, and back then the desk would open up and you thought to yourself like, well, that's, and there's also that extra added protection of there's probably paper and books in there.
I mean, there's a little bit of steel underneath.
Let's say that the atomic blast does take out that top layer of formica and particle board.
Right.
Well, you've got a textbook, probably some crayons, a few other things in there that's going to absorb the rest of it before it hits you underneath that little metal pan that is the bottom of the desk. So yeah, we felt very, very comfortable.
Being a witness to history of that level at that age, you're
with no perspective on it whatsoever, like zero.
You create your own perspective as a very young child and trying to sort it out from a kid's perspective.
Right.
Seeing the greatest that the country has to offer. Like, yeah, Martin Luther King was assassinated, but there was a Martin Luther King.
Yes.
You know, you were born in 1962.
Yeah.
They started
taking people out literally before my first birthday. John Kennedy was killed before my first birthday. He was killed on the 23rd of November. I was born on the 28th of November. So you're born into this tumult of assassinations and war. And, you know, the lifespan that I've lived began with the assassinations of John F. Kennedy and the birth of the New York Mets. And it's all sort of kind of tumbled downhill from there.
But at that age, did you start to grasp what was possible and the potential of what this country could be in moments like the assassination of Dr. King and recognizing what it meant that JFK had been assassinated?
In the moment, no. But because those moments were tent posts when I was a kid, I was fascinated by them when I got older. I was 5, I think, when Martin Luther King was killed. I think I was 6 when Robert Kennedy was killed. By the time Watergate and the end of Vietnam rolled around, like, I can remember being afraid of being drafted because there was still a draft at that time. And I was old enough that you understood and we knew people whose children had been drafted or gone off to fight the war. It loomed over everyday life in a way that war has not in America since, because they deinstituted the draft and the country no longer shares in that experience. Like in baseball, they're specialists now. We have long relievers and short relievers, but not everybody plays the game. So all that got packed into the first 10 years. Assassination, war, betrayal of the highest office in the land. But lacking in any of that was context or perspective. So I was a kid, but it landed hard because of the uncertainty of it all. And I think I spent the next 10 years trying to figure out the perspective of it, the context of it. So that's when I think it was not until the 70s that those questions that you are bringing up, which are the natural questions. And that's when I discovered Kurt Vonnegut and Huxley and Orwell. Like, I became really obsessed with these humanist, but ultimately dystopian visions of societies that had been written in the 30s and the 40s, but still had incredible resonance because of how chaotic the 60s were.
See, for me, it's the 80s.
Right.
Now, I'm a black kid in California, and the 80s was also a lot of music that was positive and revolutionary. And, we were finding our identity as young men, young black men in America and what that meant. You being in Jersey and Jewish, were you a young Jewish kid? Were you a young Jerseyan? Did you identify or relate to the world in that way?
When you were a young Jewish kid in like the 60s and 70s, you couldn't not relate to. You're close enough to the generation of the Holocaust, and you're enough of an anomaly in that area that you can't help but perceive yourself as the other, because that's how you're treated and that's how you're viewed. So, and for somebody who was smaller than most, younger than most, it just became another way of deflecting insecurity. Was you just embrace the humor of it. It's interesting that you bring up the 80s and black identity in that time, because you're relating to the counterculture of the status quo. And I think even being Jewish, you didn't feel counterculture. You felt the uncertainty of the culture. You were immersed in that feeling of revolution, whereas I think where I grew up, they were immersed in that feeling of nostalgia, of the country that used to be, of the status quo that was being torn asunder. Your community was seen as the threat. Those movements that you're talking about were actually perceived in these other communities as the very thing that was creating this chaos and uncertainty.
As a smaller guy in stature,
that hurts.
You identified that way.
We're on a podcast. I could, as far as these people know, I'm 6'4". They don't know.
In spirit. That's what I see.
Thank
is
you.
A 6'4" towering behemoth of a man.
And yet, visually, you see an osteoporotic.
The fight that's in you, was that born out of the fact that if you're a small guy, I imagine in Jersey, certainly in Oakland, you're going to have to figure out how to stand up for yourself.
Yes.
Where and when did you connect to that?
Boy, that's a great one. And it is such an interesting thing because, like you say, you can't help but be defined by the elements that are around you and how it lights you up. I think for me, it was those feelings of trying to square the circle of those tumultuous events that I grew up with, that dichotomy of a country that is, it's America. We're American. We're the greatest country in the world. We put a man on the moon. That was the whole thing, in 1969. We put a man on the moon. It was the worst thing that could ever happen to us, because then anything else that went wrong, you could we put a man on the moon. Until you realize, that's just kind of a weird thing that we did. You know what? Putting a man on the moon is kind of like, what are those guys? Dude Perfect.
Oh, man.
It's one of those things where just
I went up on a building and I threw a basketball off an airplane, and then it bounced over there and it went through the net.
You're like, that's amazing. What are we doing with that? That's just a weird, we put a man on the moon.
It sounded impossible.
Yes.
We did what was necessary to make it possible, and that's what makes us fundamentally Americans.
We see, we want, we do, it's done.
There's this mythology that then grows out of that.
We're exceptional.
Americans are exceptional.
We win world wars, we rebuild the European economy, and we go to the moon. There's nothing we can't do.
And then all of a sudden, it becomes this idea that we can manipulate the chaos around us by the very nature of our greatness. the truth is, we were just trying to fuck Russia over. Like, when you really boil it down, our generals went,
They put a what in the where? Sputnik? Fuck that. All right, get me one of those rockets.
like, it was a competitive and rather low. We just chose this thing because it seemed impossible, but we were really doing it as part of a Cold War effort against a communist foe. It was an extension of our worst impulses, which is,
We must triumph over the Reds.
But we can triumph over the world, and we're better at doing
yes,
world stuff than the rest of the world.
no question.
So if only democracy and capitalism could permeate through these borders.
Which is why we end up in Iraq and Afghanistan for 20 years going,
No, we're the people who come in and we do wreck your place. We do fuck it up. But then we rebuild it and then we become friends.
Oh, the makeup sex.
the makeup sex is phenomenal. Look at us in Japan, look at us in Germany. We dropped an atomic weapon on Japan. Now look at us. Karaoke bars everywhere. We love this place.
So the promise of America, that fundamental dream as a youth, did that penetrate the kind of daunting and debilitating nature of your actual circumstances in
question.
Central Jersey? Like, hey, I don't have to live out my life here. I can do whatever I want to do.
Oh, no.
Because that's America.
No.
I can dream.
No. That never occurred to me. What was far more within my purview was I was going to reserve a seat at the tavern that was up the street from us on Route 1. It was a bar that was underneath a liquor store. It was called the Bottom Half because that was
which is right below the center, by the way.
Yes, that's
the bottom half.
That's exactly right. Right below the center. It was not central. It was the bottom half, not the groin. Bottom half. You know, there's a very prescribed life that you lead. You go to this town. You will probably go to college. You know, everybody had that aspiration. You would go to college, and then you would come back, and you would put in your labor, and you would get married, and you would select that seat at the bar, and you would just slowly decay on that chair while getting tremendously good at foosball and darts. So yeah, no, that idea of this broader world did not occur to me until much later. Because I where I grew up was not that place. Now, there was a prep school up in our town where I think you did probably get that perspective. Lawrenceville Prep. Now, I went to the public high school, but the Lawrenceville Prep, you definitely had a sense like, hey, man, when you guys are done with high school, can I work for you? Like, you know,
Right.
I worked at the landscape company that we did the grounds there. But you did look at those kids and think, like, it definitely felt like, you know, an S.E. Hinton novel. Like, we're the outsiders. You know, we considered ourselves the toughs, even though we were completely not.
But hardworking, a decent family, a home,
Yep, that's exactly
college
right.
education, that's a good life. Even if you wither away on the bar stool later in it, you got your kids and your
But it
your
was
legacy.
never, I don't think it was ever what you thought was that's a good life. That you just thought that's your life. It's not like the adults in my town were happy. Like, my parents were unhappy.
You were conscious of that.
No question. You know, my mom is a teacher and my dad was a physicist. You know, he worked at a lab and went through layoffs in the 70s when the big economic decline in like 73, you know. So, but I always got the sense that, so their generation is born of the Depression and World War II. So their mindset is,
Life is to suffer.
life is to suffer and you suck it up so that your kids don't have to face the things that you faced. So your goal in life is,
I will be a pack mule.
and I will do it because I'm dutiful and this is my obligation, but I won't be happy. The whole point of the 70s was everybody that was raised from the 40s and the 50s and 30s and suddenly waking up and going,
I'm fucking sad.
and it was the feminine mystique. And I'm okay, you're okay. And suddenly pop psychology and the me decade, and everybody was trying to figure out, why am I just doing this to do it? What do I want to do? It was a question that they had never asked themselves. So our generation was more aligned with that, but it didn't really pop until Reagan. Reagan was the one who, when he came in, was like,
let's all make some money. Let's continue this imperialistic thing we've got going.
Like the vibe there was Gordon Gekko, greed is good. But it was a very different mentality. You have to think of it in terms of like, first generation is, they're the people that were suffering greatly wherever they were, whether it be Ireland or some other land where they thought, I will get out of this terrible poverty or war or pestilence or whatever, and I will go to the land of opportunity, and I will go there with nothing, and I will work so that my children will never be raised in this.
Italian, yeah, from the European perspective,
That's
Italian.
right. So that's the
British.
town I grew up in. Irish, Italian, Polish. So the mentality is that first generation came here and fucking beat it into the ground to get to that next level. My parents, they're second generation. Second generation is, they're the ones that take the brunt of,
how dare you complain about anything? I fucking came here with nothing. I walked 15 miles both ways uphill,
you know, the old Cosby.
Right.
My generation was the one who finally had the chance to go like,
you don't understand me. You don't know what it's like to be a teenager.
Did you say these things to your parents?
No.
Were you? No. So if
but
they're...
that's the generational vibe. By third generation, you get to be a selfish prick.
When you pick up an instrument but don't learn how to play it, you can always put it down. But what if you're the instrument? How do you find your sound without playing yourself? Chapter 2, Earning Your Slice. But your relationship with your parents, how much did that either drive you in the sense that, hey, these people are sad, I don't want to be sad, or were they inspirational people in that, hey, did they tell you could do anything?
Well, my dad was sort of out of the picture by the time I was 10. And he was the one that I was like, oh, that guy's miserable. Uh-huh. Like, women were accustomed to not getting what they wanted. And so their awakening in the 70s was ERA and empowerment. And I don't just have to be a housewife. You know, women were much more miserable in the 50s and said, like, they were the dutiful wives. They had their prescribed role, the dutiful wives. And to step out of that was to be almost iconoclastic. You know, people would say, like, you know, she went to nursing school. There's something.
Right.
You know, it was the males that fell apart. So that was the era of midlife crisis. So they did everything that their parents told them they were supposed to do. You join the army, you go to school, you get a degree, you come out, you get your job in a lab or in a company. You're going to work there for 50 years. You're going to get to the suburbs. You're going to have your own little slice of heaven. But you know what I mean? It's that sense of, when the music kicks in. But you know what I mean? It's that sense of, that was laid out to them by their parents. And so by the time we came along, that all had crumbled. So that paradigm had shown itself to be a facade, and there was a corruption underneath it. And that was the tumult of the 70s. So the 60s were, our best and brightest are killed. We're in a war. The president of the United States is a criminal. The 70s was,
how do I feel about that?
Right.
So the 70s was sort of this pop psychology decade where those more dutiful bounds began to unravel.
And that has a lot to do with self-identity.
Yes.
Like who you are, what that means in the world, and I'm important, I have a voice.
Yes.
I have a future because I'm important and have a voice.
Yes.
And so in my era, like in the 80s, it was very much a badge of honor to have an African-rooted name. Now, I was given a birth name of Muslim descent. It's an African name, a given name. Now, listen, I'm going to impart to you some personal information. I don't speak about this a lot, but Radio
Your real
Rahim
name is Craig.
It's not my birth name.
Oh.
The radio actually
that's interesting.
isn't on the birth certificate. But I grew up
I always assumed that radio was your surname and that it was, this is like when you see a Korean name, you think it's backwards, but it's not.
Most people do.
I thought your name was Rahim Radio, and then they flipped it.
John, you're so close. You're so close. But identifying with your roots, especially for a Black American kid in the 80s, is very important. You changing your name from something that is really easily identifiable with your community to something that...
My full name, for the listeners who don't know, my full name is Jewy Jewerson.
Right, which it has a ring to it. I got to tell you, you might have made a mistake with this one.
Jewy P. Jewerson.
The P is a little pretentious,
that's right,
to be honest.
Right.
In my case, having the Rahim as the surname, it still connects me back to a community that's global and a heritage, and my family understands, right? What was the reason for changing your name?
Changing that.
Yeah, and did it feel like you were disconnecting from something?
It didn't, because, it did feel like I was disconnecting from something, but not a Jewish heritage. It felt like I was disconnecting from my father. And in some ways, that was the point. But I don't think I ever identified it in that way. And now, in the Jewish community, it's different schools of thought. It's Orthodox, Conservative, and Reform. And so you kind of walk down that slope. So there was a certain... If you came in, you were more observant when you first got here, more tied to the old world customs, because those Jews lived in diaspora. And in the diaspora, you connect and you hold on to that cultural relevance and connection in a way that is maybe in some ways that we take for granted. So the next generation then comes up out of that, because you've come to America, and America is free, and you don't feel that. There's certainly bigotry, there's certainly prejudice, but there aren't pogroms. And so my parents then become what's sort of called conservative. But you don't actually go to synagogue every week. Maybe you go on the high holy days. You definitely have to fast still on Yom Kippur, because what's a Jewish holiday without discomfort? My generation becomes that sort of reform, like, sure, it's Yom Kippur, but what's a meatball Parmesan hero? I wasn't that bad this year anyway. Right. Yes. You stop connecting to it in a way. You're still very tied to it culturally, but the religiosity dissipates.
Every generation feels that the parents always feel like the kids aren't honoring the tradition and what we did and how we had to struggle.
There's a counter to that, in that some kids really then are searching for that connection and reconnect in a powerful way to that religion or to that culture.
And there's also the argument, well, if you did struggle and do all these things so that I could, well, then shouldn't I?
Shouldn't I do that?
Yeah.
But what it is they did all those things so that they could say you could. Basically, in Jewish families, they struggle so that they can tell you about how hard they struggle. They're not actually looking to give you that leg up. They're looking to be able to say to you,
do you know what I went through?
Right.
For you, you bastard.
My mom is an only child, so I'm not even really tied to a family. My father had a larger family, but we were estranged from them. So I was raised by a single woman who was an only child, and she worked. So I was raised by my friends. I'm not tied in to that tradition and culture in the same way. So it didn't feel like an affront to that. What it felt like for me was saying,
you know what, Father, you don't get to be a part of this. I get to be my own entity in this.
So I had a lot of anger about it. I had a lot of disappointed feelings and anger about it. So to me it was, and I was going to take my mother's maiden name, but that just felt like too big a fuck you. So I just went to my middle name. I don't ever have an eye towards legacy or history or what that means. I have an eye towards the moment, and it's always been this way. Even early on in my career, it's never been,
oh, did you want to be a talk show host?
No, I wanted to be better at telling jokes. And so that's what I was, right in front of me was, when I first started getting on stage, they didn't give me any money. I would get a plate of hummus and I would go on last. And they wouldn't let me be on the weekends. So my goal was to not be so bad that they won't let me go on before 2:00 in the morning. Like, I want to get up before midnight if possible. And if I could make that $15 and the plate of hummus, now I'm cooking with gas.
Is hummus at the comedy club like the chicken wings at the strip club? Like, is that a staple?
At this particular club, I would say not many.
Because I haven't experienced
I know
that.
it's an odd one. It's one of those.
When I started out, crudité was the prize.
Right.
Everybody had a dip.
No, this was at the Cellar, so the Olive Tree, which was a Middle Eastern
their
restaurant.
Hummus is delicious.
Just so creamy.
It's almost worth it.
It's what drove us to be better.
What's the moment that you decided that Trenton, New Jersey wasn't big enough for you and you wanted to reach
This
for
town
the
ain't
other
big enough.
thing? Yeah.
So I got out of school and I had no idea what to do. I played soccer all through college. So that's, in the way that people dream when they're in college, I thought I'm going to go and I'm going to play. At that time, there was major indoor soccer league. It was this. You'd go to Kalamazoo or Louisville and you'd play and, you'd make $600 a month or whatever. And that was the goal. But that didn't work out. And I had an injury and I will certainly blame it on that. But the truth is, even without that injury, Kalamazoo would have been my final stop. So I got out and I had no idea what to do. So I moved in with a couple friends of mine from high school and we got a place in Trenton. I started working for the state. I was doing emergency contingency planning. So basically, like if a hurricane was coming, I had to figure out how to put on a spreadsheet how many beds they had available at, Vineland Correctional Facility. And a buddy of mine from high school, his dad, his name's Vinny Regolia. His dad, also named Vinny Regolia. By the way, everybody in my town was named Vinny Regolia. He owned this bar, Franklin Tavern, and it was underneath the tavern was the bottom half. So I got a job in the liquor store. On weekends, I would work at the liquor store. During the week, I would work for the state. What'll probably happen is I'll keep working for the state and I'll transition to being a patron at the liquor store. And so now it begins. It's depressing because I do feel something. I feel like I'm not ready to be in this box. I like it. I love the people at the bar. It's fun to hang out there. It's the, I used to call it the world's first blue collar gay bar. Like it was all dudes. Like at the bottom half.
Wait, all dudes at the bottom half?
Swear to God, it was called the bottom half. And it was basically all dudes, like blue collar dudes. And like every now and again, you would see two legs because it was down in the basement. Two legs that would be female would walk down. They'd get about halfway down. Then you'd see a female head bend over. Then they would look down into the bar and see what appears to be a union shop meeting.
Yes.
And they would turn around and go back out.
Danger. What they saw was danger.
What they saw was danger. But there was this music club in Trenton called City Gardens. And it was on Calhoun Street. It was a really rough place. It was, as they would say, punk as fuck. There was a group there called The Family, skinheads that would do a thing called mow the lawn or pave the road. The mosh pit would start, you'd have bands like Bad Brains or,
I'm sorry. What is mowing the lawn and paving the road?
So in the mosh pit, as it gets going, this group of skinheads would stand. This place was basically a warehouse. They would stand at the back. They would lock arms. And they would plow the entire length of the club. It was vicious. And you would drag bodies out of there every night. The energy in that joint, even in the violence, was electrifying. It was Henry Rollins on stage with Black Flag, and diving into the crowd and the butthole surfers lighting the place on fire before you realize, the shit on the walls, that just burns. That's just, before you realize, we're supposed to have a fire exit.
Yeah, you're the center of the sun. It's everything.
X played a show. There was the only time I held a gun.
Get down to the ground!
Two skinheads popped an off-duty cop, got his gun. Somehow I ended up with it behind the bar in the middle of a giant fight and was holding it up in the air doing one of those
Everybody listen to me! I'm gonna shoot the ceiling!
But what that place did for me was it lit the fire.
As crazy as it was and violent and devoid of women,
Yes.
those people were free.
Yes.
They were expressing a freedom.
They were expressing a freedom, but they were also expressing a desire. But within that desire, they were expending energy. What I learned from that place was changing your station. Freedom takes energy, effort, tenacity, resilience, like to bend the course. What do they say? The arc of history is long, but it bends towards justice.
That's right.
Well, what bends it?
It's
the action of individuals whose dissatisfaction allows them to overcome the inertia and the gravitational pull of these lives that are more prescribed for us. You know, there were people that you met where you're like, that person is marked for something. Like, I don't know what it is, but they have a charisma. They have an ability. There's something in them that I look at and I go like, I'm going to keep an eye on that person because I bet they're going to do something really interesting. That wasn't me.
Well, when did you find the thing then? I mean, getting out of that space, how did you get to the stage?
I'd always felt something when I watched comedy, when I listened to it. You know, I'd always been an enormous fan of, you know, Steve Martin and Monty Python and George Carlin and Richard Pryor. And there was always something in the way that some people sense music in themselves. I always felt like the way that they express themselves felt authentic to me and the way my brain works. I always felt that I vibrated at a different frequency than everyone around me. I felt very alone. And it's why I loved bartending. It's a simulation when you're bartending. You have the experience of being out, but you're not out. You don't really have to be out. You have a task. You're surrounded by out, but you're not out. You're working. But it gave you the illusion of normalcy and you know.
It's Friday night. I'm out. There's a band playing. There's people dancing.
You can
I'm
be
out.
alone with 1,000 people.
Correct. And with reason. Because if you're not working at the bar, then you're the weird guy
You're
standing alone out with 1,000 people, not talking to anybody, and you're the one that security's keeping an eye on.
Or you're mowing the lawn and paving the way.
Right, exactly.
Yes.
And so that feeling as it started to grow became undeniable for me. It took about 2.5 years. And I got to a point of the discomfort was so strong that I was like, I have to make this change. I don't know how or why. In the span of a couple of weeks, dismembered all that had been assembled on my behalf for this, 50-year, 60-year lifespan I was going to live in New Jersey. Sold the car, quit the job, grabbed a U-Haul, got a 6-week sublet, and moved there. My first night was the inauspicious debut of pulling up to an apartment building sublet where I can't find the keys and I have to climb up the fire escape to get to the 4th floor to get somebody to open up the thing and let me in so that I can move my shit in.
Many people would call that a rite of passage. You became a New Yorker in that moment.
I'm going to trust my discomfort. The fight is you have to provide the impetus and the energy to change your station, to change your trajectory. I had to pursue that.
But it's such a coming of age time when that moment happens,
Sure.
at whatever age it is. You can be so self-absorbed with what am I doing? What am I going to do next? What does this mean? Will I survive it? But in New York, it's hard to be blind. Like, you see a lot.
Mm-hmm.
Are you at that point aware of the world around you?
All around you in New York at that time are the rubble of lives that did not work out. When you go to this place of opportunity, you're not swept away by, when they say when you come to America and the streets are paved with gold. Well, these streets were paved with, drug dealers and human excrement. It was a rough time in New York City. And you saw evidence all around you of how easily the undertow could get you, and you'd be pulled under and you wouldn't be able to get up again for oxygen. It's not like I could walk by those people and be like,
well, I'm not that guy. Because I could be.
Right.
I didn't have money, didn't have a job. It was a scramble. It was all hands on deck. Let's make a life from scratch. Let's see how this goes.
No matter how good a fighter you are, if you gas out, the fight's over. How do you train for an opponent that never runs out of air? Chapter 3, The Final Boss. So your comedy was about kind of your New York life, your Jewish identity.
Yes.
Your...
But I didn't even get on stage I lived in New York for almost a year before I even tried to get on stage because I had so much I had to survive. I didn't have a moment to like exhale and go like, so now let me explore the comedy scene. Like it didn't work that way for me. But
when you did get on stage, did you think about what style of comedy am I going to do?
I was trying on clothes. There were days where I go on there and I had a
weird accent.
Days when I went on there and I was Stephen Wright. Just monotone, one-liners. To do this right, it has to be authentic. So what you're doing is you're doing an impression of other people doing comedy. Because you don't know who you are. And I didn't know who I was as a person. So how could I be an artist when I didn't even know who I was or how I wanted to express or what I wanted to express? And that's where the Comedy Cellar was invaluable because they were kind enough to see something in what I was doing. And so Sunday through Thursday night, last guy up for 2 years, 3 years. I learned how to read rooms, how to read people, how to read situations, how to bring my life into that room, how to bring the outside world into my life, into that room. It was all about learning how to play an instrument. Sadly for the audience, when you're learning to be a musician in comedy, they have to listen to you practice. And it sounds like shit most of the time. And then you learn how to love sounding like shit and how to get out of it, how to fly that plane. And when it goes into a tailspin, how to pull out or how to crash it into the side of a mountain and enjoy the ride. Like all those things. I went to college.
And you honed your craft.
Yes. And it's always all I wanted. All I wanted was to be good at this. I wanted to be good.
A lot of those people in the undertow, people saw something in them. Probably wouldn't even got to New York in the first place. Somebody didn't see something in them.
That's right.
But they never got to the place where they saw it in themselves or were able to realize what they saw in themselves. They couldn't bring it to fruition.
That's right.
You did that at some point. When did you see it? When I say not just see the potential, but see it actualize, like, oh shit, I got something. Like this actually is something I can do. This is my moment.
People always say that, when did you know you'd made it? And you don't. The way I always try to explain it is what you accept is this is your ride. And so like people would say, what are you most proud of? Give me a moment. And I've had some amazing ones. Ultimately, what I'm most proud of is that an ignorant idiot from New Jersey took that chance and didn't squander it by taking anything for granted. And I couldn't just allow myself to slip into the undertow. There's all kinds of traps, drugs and alcohol and depression. There's a lot out there in a life like this.
On both sides of success. You don't have to be a failure to experience any of the things you just named.
No question. I always watched the angry guys, the people that were bitter, the people that felt like they were angry that their lives didn't have that moment. And I learned never to be the guy that viewed this as anything other than a gift that had been given to me as an opportunity to live a life that I got to chart. And I've seen guys who have success beyond their wildest dreams, beyond my wildest dreams, who carry with them an anger and a resentment at some slight or something they didn't get or some person. And it corrodes them from the inside out. My lesson was not, how was I going to make it? It's, how was I going to stop from eating myself alive, as I saw so many really talented people do? How do you navigate this journey with a sense of gratitude? And that came from failure.
Watching your early comedy stand-up, it's funny, but it's not particularly politically slanted.
Nope.
I wouldn't put you in a category. Like, oh, this guy talks about this.
Right.
And you had talk shows.
Like a regular talk show. Like funny monologue.
Yeah, you know,
now we've
late
got
night with
weird guest.
Jon Stewart.
Now we've got, right.
Yeah,
that's
it would be
right.
that kind of thing.
That's exactly right.
And whether or not the show went or not, or went for as long as you would hope, maybe you may consider that a failure because it didn't go for as long as...
Well, when they lock you out of the office, that it's hard not to view that as anything
Isn't that
other
more
than...
their failure, though?
You know what? That's probably true.
You did something with this vehicle that history wouldn't have informed. Where's the transition between I'm a stand-up comic, I'm a talk show host, I'm going to entertain, I'm going to keep this energy going, I won't get caught in the undertow to, now I have a purpose, a direction, something that I want to accomplish with this tool?
You sort of learn about producing something. So stand-up is very much, and I got to the point where I could do mushrooms for a week and wake up and go on stage. And like to the audience, I got to be a good enough craftsman that it could forgive my imperfections to an audience. You start to realize there's a more sophisticated refinery that goes on behind this. But then you continue to challenge yourself and build a different set of tools. Managing people, comedy is a very solitary form. But what if you could marshal other resources and manage them so that we're all working towards the same goal? And that's the talk show. And everything has a render time. If I want to make a graphic, if I want to do a bit, if I want to shoot it and then edit it, you start to learn all the different subsets of creating your voice. But now I'm getting older and I've had some shots. Someone's going to say to me,
what was it like to have your own show?
And I'm going to go,
Fucking miserable.
You know what? I'm going to go out doing the way I want to do it with the joy that I want to bring to it. I need to be authentic. My next shot, if I was lucky enough to get one, I wasn't going to squander.
The next shot was?
The Daily Show. The host of it, Craig Kilborn, was leaving. And I had always been knocking around that world of talk shows. There was always that, like,
Tom Snyder's leaving. Maybe they'll hire Stewart.
But never did. So when he left and I knew the people that ran the Daily Show and they asked me if I might be interested in doing it, what I really thought was, here's this incredible vehicle. It's a funny look at our pop culture, our thing. Could I make it relevant to what I cared about? Everything that you see is by design. In government, in news, everything that is on that screen is a choice. Somebody made a choice. All the things that I had learned in producing television taught me that nothing is really an accident, that everything that you're looking at, there's a meeting. People sit in a meeting and they go,
Well, what do you want that costume to look?
And what do you want behind you?
How do you want it shot? What music do you want there?
when you begin to see the political world as a production, you start to look at it as, oh, when they say campaign consultant, what they really mean is segment producer. And you begin to translate the actual world to the content world. And you find those analogous positions. And that fascinated me. I wanted to do a show that deconstructed the show that our government puts on, that deconstructed the show that our media puts on and see if we could expose that space in between the two so that people got a truer look at what they were watching. I wanted to do that. It felt worthwhile to me. And I felt like if I'm going to go back into this and I'm going to spend this much time in it, I want it to be a pursuit that I feel is valuable to me or valuable to people.
Watching a show that's produced for a particular effect to entertain, that is put forward as, oh, everything just kind of happened. This is a natural, I just sat in this chair and what's behind me just happened to be behind me.
Yes.
And, oh, my hair happens to be perfect because this is how I comb it.
It's what we do.
That's entertainment. But people will seek that out and that's fine. When government is going through that process, you're not supposed to be looking to government to entertain you. You're looking to government to inform you and to protect you, most importantly, for the pursuit of happiness and justice and all the things that government should provide in the land. So if they're putting on a show that's false, it's phony, or destructive, if you're going to pull the curtain back and show the strings on the puppets and show the false nature of what they're putting forward as true, well, you've picked an enemy. You've picked a fight.
I used to say to everybody in the room, I said,
Look around the room. When you leave this show, these will be the only friends you have left.
News people would always come up to us and go, wow.
Wow, we wish we could say what you say.
And I go,
Yeah, if only you had a television show. Oh, wait, you do.
every night. So why don't you tell the truth? Why don't you say what's really going on? And you always see it. And they pretend they're not being manipulated. How many times do you hear them say,
Unidentified sources close to the president say that.
well, that's just them gossiping and them giving information and feeding each other information. That's also a manipulation. They're all using each other, but doing it in such a way as to preserve the sanctity of the game they're all playing. Nobody wants to do something so egregious within that pool that they get removed from the game, or that the game itself ends, because the game enriches everybody who plays it.
Now, when you talked about leaving Jersey and the inspiration it took to survive in New York, there was a certain passion in your voice. There was a certain intensity there.
Yeah.
That intensity and that passion returned
Back, baby.
just now when you're talking about this fight you're in.
At that point, by the way, because I had failed, and the one thing as a comic you want to do is you want to get on Letterman. So about 6 years into my comedy career, I got on Letterman. And I remember doing that set, do stand-up on Letterman, and I remember going back to my apartment that night and being like,
Oh, shit.
but on the flip side of that, I got canceled, the very thing that I thought could destroy me. And that I wasn't smaller. I wasn't 5'3". What you learned is, as long as you're okay, you'll be okay.
Which gives you a freedom to do what it is.
That's right.
That makes you feel not just okay, but fucking good.
It wasn't enough anymore to just do something. You had to do something with intention, something purposeful. And that was the journey of that.
You have a purpose
Right.
now.
That's right.
Beyond survival, you're doing a thing. Is it the news media that's your nemesis? Is it the politicians who are disingenuous, the system? How would you define at that point, with your narrow focus of mind and purpose of action, your opponent?
I did always assume it to be the news media. I think there was also a default that you felt like, well, the politicians are being disingenuous because they're salespeople. Salespeople bring you onto the lot and go,
That's a butte, right?
and you're like,
I don't know. Kind of looked like, really, it only has 100 miles on it because it's from 1963. So it seems like maybe that's 100,000 miles and it's rolled over.
I always viewed the news media as our immune system. What I would always say is you don't blame the monkey for throwing shit. That's what monkeys do. They throw shit at you. I blame the news media for not saying,
Bad monkey.
they're trying to sell and gain power. Your job is to bring clarity to their deception. They don't want clarity. Clarity doesn't serve their purpose. Their business model is not based on your understanding of the simplicity of their scam. That's where I look at the media and say, why are you complicit in the scam? Why isn't your job the simple job of, let me put this to you in English. This is what they're doing. Simply that. And here's how they're trying to obscure it from you. And here's how it could work better for you. It's a simple job, but it's an important one. And instead of that, they become complicit in the deception.
Disrupting the business model.
No question.
Which has been the downfall of many revolutionaries. Disrupting the business model is the most dangerous thing you can do in any country, especially a capitalist one.
And we weren't we weren't revolutionaries. I think what we were was idealistic observers who felt very strongly that there was a better way to do this. The forces of confusion and obfuscation are relentless. Look what the right has done. Reality wasn't working out to their political benefit. So they built parallel institutions that would say the things that they wanted them to say. So in other words, the things that we all relied on as not dogma, but authoritative influences on civic life. The right is saying,
what if we built our own think tanks and colleges and media and just, when we needed to, quote them?
Well, black people aren't killed more than white people are by the police. Look at this statistic.
Where'd that come from?
The Institute for Freedom and Lawfulness.
I can name it anything. It means nothing, but it carries the patina of credibility and authority because it's from a think tank. It's an academic paper. It's from a university. It's there to obscure. There's a real discussion now about global warming. There's some scientists say yes, but some say no. Right. But the scientists who say no are from the Institute of Thoughtful Experimentation. That you've created this thing that you can bring in that can muddy the water. My point is, their goal in their pursuit of power is to muddy water. So you can't see clearly, so you can't make the most informed choice about the direction that you think the country should go in.
The fact that you were the most trusted news source, not the most trusted satirical news source, but people viewed The Daily Show as their nightly news.
The institutions that you would normally look at to that had so abdicated their authority, right? Mm-hmm. There was an internet poll. Who's the most trusted newsman in America? It was, I think, Peter Jennings, Brian Williams, Diane Sawyer, or Jon Stewart. And I won. But really, you could have put on there Peter Jennings, Diane Sawyer, Brian Williams, or a golden wrapped dildo. And a golden wrapped dildo would have won because none of the above is the correct answer.
People have lost trust and confidence and faith in the institutions that govern.
In some respects, it's a fantasy. It's that everybody loves the second string quarterback because he hasn't done anything wrong yet. And I do think we earned a credibility because I think we tried very hard not to take things out of context and to make our arguments so that they were honest. They weren't deceptive. People would always say, you edit things out of context. Actually, no, we don't. We really took a lot of time to make sure that we felt that the essence of what this person was trying to express was expressed in whatever clip we did. Hopefully people respected that.
You started to go after these people where they lived. You went to Crossfire. You went to Fox. You went on other people's shows who were doing the other thing and would never acknowledge any of the things you just said because it would immediately turn them into clowns and liars, destructive Americans. And you put the finger in their face and say, this is what you're doing. And this is what it's doing to us.
Yeah, I was incredibly annoying.
But, okay, so where did the difference between I'm doing the show, I'm here, I'm in control of this environment, and I'm just going to show the audience what I see, to now I'm bringing the fight to them. You told people to stop.
The most famous episodes of that were probably the Crossfire one and the Jim Cramer one.
Sure.
Well, I'm not on TV, and he's still hitting buttons and horns and yelling at people to buy or sell. All you can do is your intention. Your intention is to conduct your show in the manner that you think has the most integrity, and hope that you inspire real grassroots people that are gonna do the shoe leather work, that are gonna create new paradigms and new programs and new ways of deconstructing things that can have some efficacy, but also you can't fight a great white shark unless you're relentless. They don't sleep. And that's what you're up against. 24-hour behemoths is gonna take more than viral moments of catharsis or viral moments of,
yeah, you eviscerated that guy.
or you destroyed that guy. Turns out, no, I didn't. I just exhausted myself.
But I think you did bend the arc
Well,
of justice.
boy, that would be the greatest epitaph, you could ever write for that. No one wants to feel that what they did was for naught. Do you know what I mean?
You got a lot of babies. And I mean,
Yeah.
as children, I mean, things that were birthed through The Daily Show, people who
Right.
came through that and are now.
Right. And I don't view them as babies. I had a lot of collaborators.
Okay, fair.
And we were the Wu-Tang. And so they went off and they did,
yeah, they're solos.
Method went off and ODB, and now they're doing solo. And they took what we all learned together and then brought it and expanded on it and did their own thing with it where it's authentically theirs.
I don't know if you realize this, but you produced something that is now living beyond the house or the factory in which you produce it. Now
Yes.
there's all these other factories that are
Yes.
producing more factories.
Yes.
That is bending the curve. You want nuance? You want somebody to be able to look at all this bullshit and then be able to decipher it?
Yeah.
You don't have to stop the bullshit. You just have to give them some place to go to decipher it. And I think you've made many stations for that.
We solidified a link in the chain. And that's a really important place to be, because that's I'm really proud of. That we took these other, Smothers Brothers and Lenny Bruce and all that, and all the hard work that they did to solidify a link in the chain, and we didn't break the chain for them. What you hope is that chain is inspiring a chain in the real world of work, in the real world of activism, in the real world of hopeful, solutionary education and authority.
We're in that moment as a country.
No question.
Right now.
No question.
Trying to determine what we put in its place, if we've even successfully deconstructed the corruption of what's already there and what put people in these streets,
Yes.
rioting, protesting, finding a new reality that is acceptable as opposed to living under the wildly unacceptable normalcy of what they've experienced.
What you guys have here in Yellow Springs, it's like capital city, and I feel like the rest of us live in District 7.
This is a microcosm
Yeah.
for what could be
No question.
macro.
Yes.
We've created something here, something of a factory, if you will,
Yep.
of freedom, of community, people of all walks, different skill sets, artists, everyone coming here
It's a
to create
commune.
a new.
It's a commune
reality.
with less fucking. All right.
What's next? What's the purpose now?
Not allowing the status quo to escape with superficial first aid on gaping wounds that have never been brought to the sunlight. That's the next generational fight.
Continue to be in that fight,
Always.
participate
I will.
in that purpose.
Our conversations have inspired me. Your passion about applying the process of what you know so well of fight game, but realizing that the process of the fight game is applicable and analogous to this larger existence kind of has me thinking about that. And it's exciting.
The fight's still on, John.
Fight's still on.
Fight's still on. And you know what?
And if Tyson and Jones can come back, who's to say I can't still get in the ring?
You retired unified undisputed champion. There's no other news show, no other satirical machine, no other factory that produced what you did. And when you did it, it was so crucial. We're talking 9/11. We're talking almost the collapse of the economy. We're the first black president. Well, you got out just before the first
openly asshole president.
That might even be arguable. But what you were able to accomplish, my man, was so important. And the idea that you even think for a second that they've won is absurd. You saved us from them having the whole platform. Don't stop the fight. Hailing out of central New Jersey, fighting well above his weight class, towering over small minds, Jon Stewart. To this day, Radio Rahim. Till This Day is a Luminary original podcast. It's produced by Pilot Boy and Alex Casnoff for Salt Audio. Executive produced by Dave Chappelle and me, Radio Rahim. Most importantly, I'd like to thank my mom. You may know her as Dr. Rita Muhammad, without whom none of this is possible.
Original audio production, music and sound design by Salt. Executive produced by Pilot Boy. Executive produced by Noah Gersh, Jamie Schefman, Nick Panama, and Kenzi Wilbur. Creative producer, Alex Casnoff. Executive producer, Elliot O'Day. Head of production, Liz LeMay. Head of engineering, Jordan Galvan. Production manager, Allie Strobel. Post coordinator, Alice Bearn. Edited by Geoffrey Mutchnik. Mixed by Salt. Additional editing and sound design by Jasper Van Dijk and Noah Kowalski.